The rain came down in sheets so thick that Tessa Finnegan could barely see 3 feet in front of her face, and she had nowhere left to go. She sat on the wooden steps of the general store in Monticello, Utah Territory, her threadbare dress already soaked through to her skin, her small traveling bag clutched against her chest, as if it might offer some protection against the storm and the cruelty of the world. The evening sky had turned bruised and angry, matching the way she felt inside, and she wondered if this was how her story would end, shivering alone on a stranger's doorstep in a town where nobody knew her name. She had left Denver 3 weeks ago with promises of a teaching position at a small school near the Mormon settlements. But when she arrived, she discovered the letter had been a forgery, written by her former employer's nephew who had wanted to court her and thought distance might change her mind. Now she was stranded without money, without prospects, and without a single soul who cared whether she lived or died. The rain plastered her dark hair to her face, and she closed her eyes, trying not to cry because tears felt like a luxury she could not afford. The sound of boots splashing through puddles made her look up, squinting against the rain. A tall figure emerged from the downpour, leading a horse that looked just as miserable as she felt. The man wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, and his long duster coat flapped in the wind like the wings of some great bird. For a moment, she thought he might walk right past her, but his steps slowed, then stopped altogether. "Madam." His voice cut through the sound of the rain, deep and concerned. "Are you all right?" Tessa wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the question. Was she all right? She was as far from all right as a person could be, but she swallowed the bitter response and simply shook her head, not trusting her voice. The man took a step closer, and she could see his face now beneath the brim of his hat. He was perhaps 27 or 28 years old, with strong features weathered by sun and wind, and eyes that held genuine worry. Without saying another word, he shrugged out of his long coat and held it toward her. "Take this," he said. "You will catch your death sitting out here like this." "I cannot," Tessa managed, her teeth chattering. "I have no way to return it to you. I am not asking for it back." He draped the coat over her shoulders before she could protest further. The warmth of it, still carrying his body heat, made her gasp. "I am Tobias Quinn. I have a ranch about 5 miles north of here. Where are you staying?" The question hung in the air between them, and Tessa felt her face flush despite the cold. "Nowhere," she admitted quietly. "I came here for a position that does not exist, and I have used the last of my money for food." Tobias was silent for a long moment, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Then he said something that would change both their lives forever. "Come with me. I have a housekeeper who passed on last month, and I have been looking for someone to help with the cooking and cleaning. The work is honest, and I can pay fair wages." "You do not even know me," Tessa said, looking up at him with wide eyes. "I could be anyone." "You could be," he agreed. "But you are sitting in the rain with nowhere to go, and I need help. Seems like we might be able to help each other. Besides, my mother raised me to believe that sometimes folks need a hand up, not a hand out. This would be work, honest work if you want it." Tessa studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or ill intent, but all she saw was earnest sincerity. The rain continued to pour down, and she knew she had no real choice. She could accept this stranger's offer, or she could stay here and hope the morning brought better options, which seemed unlikely at best. "All right," she said finally. "I will accept your offer, Mr. Quinn. Thank you." "Tobias," he corrected gently. "No need for formalities. Can you ride?" "Not well," she admitted. "That is all right. You can ride with me, and we will tie your bag to the saddle." He offered her his hand and helped her to her feet. The coat hung nearly to her ankles, and she wrapped it tightly around herself, grateful for its warmth. Getting onto the horse proved awkward, but Tobias was patient and respectful, helping her up before swinging into the saddle behind her. His arms came around her to hold the reins, and Tessa tried not to think about how long it had been since anyone had touched her with such gentle care, even in this practical way. They rode through the storm in silence, the rain gradually lessening to a steady drizzle. Tessa could feel the warmth of Tobias behind her, solid and reassuring, and despite everything, she felt safer than she had in weeks. The landscape around Monticello was rugged and beautiful, with red rock formations rising in the distance and scrubby vegetation clinging to the sandy soil. It was different from anything she had known in Boston, where she had grown up before her parents died and left her to make her own way in the world. "Tell me about the work," she said finally, needing to break the silence. "What would you need me to do?" "Cooking, mostly," Tobias replied. "I am a terrible cook, and I have been living on beans and hardtack for the past month. Some cleaning, laundry, mending, basic housekeeping. I have a small spread, just me and a couple of ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse. I raise horses and cattle, nothing too fancy, but it keeps me occupied." "I can cook," Tessa said. "My mother taught me well before she passed, and I am good with mending and such. What were you teaching, if you do not mind my asking?" "Literature and penmanship. I was a teacher at a girls' school in Denver for 2 years. Before that, I worked as a governess." She paused, then added, "I am 23 years old, in case you were wondering. Old enough to make my own decisions and young enough to still be foolish about them sometimes." She felt rather than saw his smile. "I am 28, and I make foolish decisions regularly, so we should get along just fine." The ranch came into view as the last of the rain sputtered out. It was modest but well-maintained, with a main house built of wood and stone, a barn that looked sturdy, and a smaller bunkhouse off to one side. Corrals held several horses, and Tessa could see cattle grazing in the distance. Everything spoke of hard work and careful stewardship, and she felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, this would be the fresh start she needed. Tobias helped her down from the horse and led her onto the covered porch of the house. "Wait here while I get the door open and light some lamps. Place has been lonely since Mrs. Henderson passed." Tessa stood on the porch, still wrapped in his coat, and watched him move through the house, lighting lamps until warm yellow light spilled through the windows. When he returned to fetch her, his hat was off, revealing brown hair that curled slightly at the ends, and she got her first real look at him. He had a kind face, she decided, with laugh lines around his eyes and a mouth that looked like it smiled often. Inside, the house was simple but comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, and a kitchen area with a cast iron stove. Doors led off to what she assumed were bedrooms. Everything was dusty and showed signs of neglect, but the bones of it were good. "Your room is through there," Tobias said, pointing to a door on the left. "It has a bed, a dresser, and a washstand. Not much, but it is private and has a good lock on the door. I want you to feel safe here, Tessa. This is your home now for as long as you want it to be." The use of her first name, which she realized she had not actually told him yet, made her pause. "I never said my name." "You did, actually, while we were riding. Maybe you did not realize you were speaking. You said your name was Tessa Finnegan and that you were tired of being afraid." He met her eyes steadily. "I want you to know that you do not have to be afraid here. I am offering honest work and honest pay, nothing more, nothing less. You have my word on that." Tessa felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means to me." "Get some rest," Tobias said gently. Tomorrow you can start settling in and we will work out the details of wages and such. For tonight, just know that you are safe and dry and that is enough." He left her then, disappearing into what must be his own room, and Tessa made her way into the small bedroom that would be hers. True to his word, it had a good lock, and she turned it with trembling fingers before sinking onto the bed. The mattress was comfortable, the quilts clean if a bit dusty, and for the first time in weeks, she let herself cry, not from despair but from overwhelming relief. Morning came with bright sunshine that seemed determined to make up for the previous night's storm. Tessa woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the lowing of cattle, and for a moment she forgot where she was. Then memory returned and she sat up, looking around the small room in the daylight. It was plain but clean, with whitewashed walls and a window that looked out over the corrals. She found her bag where she had left it the night before and pulled out a clean dress, one of only two she owned. It was faded calico, patched in several places, but it was respectable and modest. She washed her face and hands in the basin, braided her long dark hair, and tried to make herself presentable before venturing out into the main room. Tobias was already up, standing at the stove and frowning at a pot of something that smelled burnt. He looked up when she entered and gave her a rueful smile. "Good morning. I was trying to make coffee, but I think I might have murdered it." Despite everything, Tessa found herself smiling. "Let me see." She crossed to the stove and peered into the pot. The coffee was indeed burnt, the grounds having boiled over. "You need to start fresh. Where do you keep your supplies?" He showed her the pantry, which was better stocked than she had expected, and she set about making a proper breakfast. As she worked, she was aware of Tobias watching her, not in a way that made her uncomfortable but with a kind of pleased satisfaction, as if he was happy to have someone bringing life back into his home. "The hands will be coming in soon for breakfast," he said. "Usually I just point them toward the bunkhouse kitchen, but Mrs. Henderson used to feed them here and they appreciated it." "Would that be too much for your first day?" "Not at all," Tessa replied, cracking eggs into a pan. "How many are there?" "Just two right now. Charlie is older, been with me since I started the ranch 5 years ago. Good man, quiet. And there is a younger fellow named Pete who is learning the trade. Both decent sorts, and they will be respectful or answer to me." The warning in his voice was mild but clear, and Tessa appreciated it. She had worked in enough households to know that male ranch hands could be rough around the edges, and having the boss make clear his expectations would help smooth the way. Breakfast turned into a surprisingly pleasant affair. Charlie was indeed quiet, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a gentle manner. Pete was young, maybe 19 or 20, with an enthusiastic appetite and a tendency to blush whenever Tessa spoke to him directly. They both complimented her cooking effusively, and Tobias watched the whole scene with evident satisfaction. After the meal, the hands went back to their work, and Tobias lingered at the table while Tessa cleaned up. "You did not eat much," he observed. "I am still getting used to having regular meals again," she admitted. "The past few weeks have been lean." His face darkened. "How long were you sitting in that rain last night?" "Most of the afternoon. The store owner let me shelter on his steps but would not let me inside after closing." She scrubbed at a pan, not meeting his eyes. "I understand his position. He did not know me and he had to protect his property." "That does not make it right," Tobias said firmly. "You could have died of exposure, but I did not because you came along." She looked at him then, really looked at him, taking in the strength of his hands resting on the table, the set of his shoulders, the way he seemed so comfortable in his own skin. "Why did you stop? Most people would have walked right past." "My parents raised me better than that. And besides, I meant what I said last night. Sometimes folks need help, and if we cannot help each other, what is the point of any of it?" He stood and reached for his hat. I need to get to work, but you take the day to settle in. Explore the place, make yourself at home. We can talk about wages and such tonight over supper." The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Tessa threw herself into her work with determination, not just because she needed to earn her keep, but because she wanted to prove to Tobias that his faith in her had not been misplaced. She cooked hearty meals, cleaned the house until it sparkled, mended clothes and linens, and slowly began to bring order back to the ranch house. But it was more than just work. As she moved through her tasks, she found herself watching Tobias when she thought he would not notice. She watched the way he moved, efficient and purposeful. She watched how he treated his animals with patience and care. She watched how he spoke to Charlie and Pete with respect, never pulling rank unless necessary. She watched, and she found herself drawn to him in a way that both excited and frightened her. For his part, Tobias seemed equally aware of her. She would catch him looking at her across the dinner table, or see him pause in his work to watch her hanging laundry on the line. But he never overstepped, never made her feel uncomfortable or pressured. He was unfailingly polite and respectful, and somehow that made her feelings grow even stronger. 2 weeks after her arrival, Tessa was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Tobias came in earlier than usual, his face troubled. "There is a storm coming," he said. "A big one by the look of those clouds. We need to get the animals secured and make sure everything is battened down." "What can I do to help?" Tessa asked immediately. "Stay inside and make sure all the windows are secure. Fill some buckets with water in case we need them. This could be bad." He was already heading back out, calling for Charlie and Pete. Tessa did as he asked, moving through the house to check the windows and shutters. The sky had indeed turned ominous, with dark clouds rolling in from the west like some biblical plague. The wind picked up, howling around the corners of the house, and she could hear the animals in the barn calling out in distress. The storm hit with terrifying force. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder cracked so loud it felt like the world was splitting apart. Tessa stood in the main room, hands clasped together, and prayed that Tobias and the others would make it back safely. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, and just when she thought she could not stand the worry any longer, the door burst open and all 3 men stumbled inside, soaked and breathing hard. "Everyone all right?" Tobias called, shaking water from his hat. "Fine, boss," Charlie replied. "Got everything secured just in time." Pete nodded agreement, looking a bit pale but unharmed. Tessa rushed to get them towels and hot coffee, fussing over them until Charlie and Pete headed back to the bunkhouse, leaving Tobias and Tessa alone in the main room. "You should get out of those wet clothes," Tessa said, trying not to notice how the wet shirt clung to his broad shoulders. "I will heat some water for washing." "Tessa!" His voice stopped her as she moved toward the stove. "Thank you for being here, for caring. It has been a long time since anyone worried about whether I came in out of the storm." She turned to face him, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "Of course I worry," she said softly. "You saved my life. You gave me a home when I had nothing. How could I not care what happens to you?" He took a step toward her, then stopped himself. "I need to tell you something. These past 2 weeks having you here, it has felt like more than just having a housekeeper. It has felt like having a home again, a real home. And I know it is probably too soon to say this, and I do not want to make you uncomfortable, but I find myself thinking about you when I should be thinking about cattle and horses. I think about your smile and the way you hum when you are cooking, and how the house feels warm now in a way that has nothing to do with the fire in the hearth." Tessa's heart hammered in her chest. "Tobias, you do not have to say anything," he continued quickly. "I just wanted you to know. Your position here is secure regardless of how you feel. I would never use that against you, but I also could not keep silent any longer. These feelings, they are growing stronger every day, and it felt dishonest not to tell you. The storm raged outside, but inside the house, everything had gone still and quiet. Tessa took a deep breath, gathering her courage. What if I told you that I feel the same way? That I have been watching you when I thought you would not notice, and that my heart does this strange thing whenever you walk into a room. Hope flared in his eyes. Then I would ask if I might court you properly, if you would give me a chance to win your heart. You already have it, Tessa whispered. I think you had it from the moment you gave me your coat in the rain. Tobias crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides, and then his hands were cupping her face with infinite gentleness. May I kiss you? Yes, she breathed, and then his lips were on hers, soft and warm and full of promise. The kiss was everything a first kiss should be, tender and sweet, with the storm providing dramatic accompaniment outside. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling like fools. I did not expect this when I stopped to help a woman in the rain, Tobias said, resting his forehead against hers. And I did not expect to fall in love with the cowboy who offered me his coat, Tessa replied. But here we are. Here we are indeed. He kissed her again, longer this time, and Tessa felt something inside her that had been locked away for far too long finally open up. She had spent so long being afraid, being alone, being uncertain of her future. But standing in Tobias's arms, with the storm raging outside and warmth surrounding them inside, she finally felt like she had come home. The courtship that followed was the sweetest time of Tessa's life. Tobias was attentive and romantic in ways she had never experienced before. He would bring her wildflowers from the range, their bright colors a cheerful addition to the kitchen table. He would take her riding in the evenings when the work was done, showing her the beauty of the red rock country around Monticello. He would sit with her on the porch after dinner, their chairs close together, talking about everything and nothing while the stars came out overhead. But it was not just romance. They worked together, building something real and lasting. Tessa's presence had transformed the ranch house into a true home, and Tobias's business began to flourish with the stability her care provided. Charlie and Pete became like family, protective of Tessa and happy to see their boss so content. One evening about 6 weeks after that first kiss, Tobias asked Tessa to take a walk with him. The summer air was warm and sweet, and they walked hand in hand toward a rise that overlooked the ranch and the valley beyond. I have been thinking, Tobias began, then stopped and laughed at himself. Actually, I have been rehearsing this speech for days, and now that the moment is here, I cannot remember a word of it. Tessa squeezed his hand encouragingly. Just say what is in your heart. My heart says that I love you, he said simply. I love your strength and your kindness and your courage. I love the way you sing while you work and how you fuss over the chickens like they are your children. I love waking up knowing you are under my roof, and I love going to sleep thinking about seeing you at breakfast. And my heart says that I do not want to spend another day without knowing that you will be mine forever. He pulled a small box from his pocket and dropped to one knee, opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a small stone that caught the last light of the setting sun. Tessa Finnegan, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I promise I will spend every day for the rest of my life trying to make you as happy as you have made me. Tears streamed down Tessa's face, but they were tears of joy. Yes, she said, pulling him to his feet. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. I love you, Tobias Quinn, and I want nothing more than to be your wife. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made just for her. Then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and the whole world seemed to fade away until there was nothing but the two of them, and the love that had grown from a simple act of kindness on a rainy evening. They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Monticello. Tessa wore a new dress that Tobias had insisted on buying for her, pale blue cotton with white lace trim that made her feel like a princess. Charlie served as Tobias's best man, and the wife of the local minister stood up with Tessa. It was simple and perfect, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Tessa felt her heart might burst from happiness. The ranch hands had decorated the house with flowers and ribbons, and several neighbors came by to offer congratulations and gifts. There was music and dancing and laughter, and through it all, Tobias never left Tessa's side, his hand always finding hers, his eyes constantly seeking her face as if to reassure himself that she was real. When the guests finally left and they were alone, Tobias carried Tessa over the threshold of what was now truly their home. "Are you happy, Mrs. Quinn?" he asked, setting her down gently in the main room. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied, reaching up to touch his face. "When I was sitting in that rain, I thought my life was over. I never imagined that it was actually just beginning." "We are both beginning again," Tobias said, "together." Their wedding night was tender and loving, two people who had both been alone finding completion in each other. Tobias was gentle and patient, and Tessa felt safe and cherished in his arms. They loved each other until the early morning hours, whispering promises and dreams and building the foundation of their future with every touch and kiss. The months that followed their wedding were full of hard work and deep joy. Tessa threw herself into making the ranch a success, not just keeping house but learning about the business side of things, helping with the books and offering suggestions for improvements. Tobias valued her input and took her ideas seriously, and together they began to build something bigger than either of them could have managed alone. Winter came, and with it, the harsh reality of ranching in Utah Territory. There were storms and sick animals and fence lines that needed constant repair. But they faced it all together, and somehow that made even the hardest days bearable. Tessa learned to help with the animals when needed, and Tobias learned to appreciate coming home to a warm house and a hot meal even on the coldest nights. In the early spring, Tessa began to suspect that she might be carrying their first child. She waited to be sure, wanting to give Tobias the news when she was certain, and when the doctor in town confirmed her suspicions, she could barely contain her excitement. She told him that evening over dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "Tobias, I have something to tell you. We are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Then a smile spread across his face, growing wider and wider until he looked like he might split in two from happiness. "A baby, truly, truly," she confirmed, laughing at his expression. "The doctor says it should arrive sometime in October." Tobias stood up so fast his chair fell over, and then he was around the table, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around. "We are going to have a baby. Tessa, this is the most wonderful news. Are you feeling all right? Do you need anything? Should you be sitting down?" "I am fine," she assured him, cupping his face in her hands. "I am perfectly healthy and very, very happy." He placed his hand gently on her stomach, his eyes full of wonder. "Our child," he said softly, "a piece of you and me together forever." "Forever," Tessa agreed, covering his hand with hers. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Tessa bloomed with health and happiness. Tobias became increasingly protective as her belly grew, insisting she not overwork herself and hiring a young girl from town to help with the heavier housework. Tessa found his concern endearing, even when it bordered on excessive. In late October, on a crisp autumn day when the cottonwoods along the creek had turned golden, Tessa went into labor. The local midwife was summoned, and Tobias paced the porch like a caged animal, refusing to go far from the house despite Charlie's suggestions that he might be more useful checking on the cattle. After what felt like an eternity but was really only about 8 hours, the midwife emerged with a broad smile. "You have a son, Mr. Quinn. A healthy, loud son." Tobias burst into the bedroom to find Tessa propped up on pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "Come meet your son." He approached almost reverently, peering down at the tiny red face that was screwed up in displeasure at having been so recently expelled from his comfortable home. "He is perfect," Tobias whispered, "just like his mother." "We need to name him," Tessa said. "I was thinking Thomas after your father." "Thomas Quinn," Tobias tested the name. "Tommy, I like it. Father would have been honored." He carefully took the baby from Tessa, cradling him with surprising confidence for a new father. "Hello, Thomas. I am your papa, and I promise you right now that I will do everything in my power to give you a good life and to love you the way my father loved me." Watching her husband hold their son, Tessa felt her heart swell with so much love she thought she might actually float away. This was her family, built from the ashes of her old life, stronger and more beautiful than anything she had dared to dream. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, and their family grew. 2 years after Thomas came Mary, named for Tessa's mother, a sweet-tempered girl with her father's eyes and her mother's dark hair. Then came another son, named Jacob, who arrived 3 years later with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the entire valley. Tobias proved to be a devoted father, involved in his children's lives in ways that were unusual for the time, but that Tessa deeply appreciated. He taught Thomas to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk, and he was just as patient teaching Mary, despite societal expectations that girls need not concern themselves with such things. He sang silly songs to Jacob, and was not too proud to change diapers or walk the floor with a fussy baby in the middle of the night. But through it all, he never neglected Tessa. He still brought her wildflowers in the summer, still took her riding when they could steal a few moments alone, still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. Their love had matured from the passionate first bloom into something deeper and more enduring, the kind of love that comes from choosing each other every day, through good times and hard times, through the mundane and the extraordinary. When Thomas was 6 years old, something happened that reminded them both how fragile their happiness could be. A group of cattle rustlers moved through the area, stealing stock from several ranches. Tobias organized a group of ranchers to track them down, and despite Tessa's fears, he insisted it was necessary to protect their livelihood and their neighbors. "I have to go," he told her the night before they planned to leave. "If we do not stop this now, it will only get worse." "I know," Tessa said, though her voice shook. "But I cannot help remembering what it felt like to be alone and afraid, the thought of losing you." "You will not lose me," Tobias promised, pulling her close. "I have too much to live for, you and the children, this life we have built together. I am not about to throw that away for a few cattle thieves. We will track them, we will recover what we can, and I will come home to you. That is a promise." He kept that promise, returning 4 days later tired and dusty but unharmed. The rustlers had been caught and turned over to the territorial marshal, and most of the stolen cattle had been recovered. That night, after the children were asleep, Tessa held Tobias tight and let herself cry with relief. "I was so scared," she admitted. "I kept thinking about that night when you found me in the rain, and how my whole life changed because you stopped to help. I kept thinking about how easily I could have missed all of this, and how empty life would be without you. I know, Tobias said, stroking her hair. I felt the same way out there. Every time I thought about those rustlers and what they were trying to take from us, I was not thinking about the cattle. I was thinking about you and the children, and how I would do anything to protect this life we have built. You are my everything, Tessa. You and those babies are my whole world. As the years passed, Monticello grew and changed around them. The railroad came through, bringing new opportunities and new challenges. Utah moved closer to statehood, and the wild edges of the territory began to settle into something more civilized. The Quinn's ranch grew too, becoming one of the more successful operations in the area, known for quality horses and well-managed cattle. Thomas grew into a fine young man, serious and hardworking like his father, but with a gentle side that came from his mother. Mary was bright and spirited, refusing to be limited by expectations of what girls should or should not do. Jacob, the youngest, was the family's clown, always finding ways to make everyone laugh. Watching them grow, Tessa often marveled at how far she had come from that desperate young woman sitting in the rain. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Tobias surprised Tessa with a trip to Salt Lake City. They left the children in the capable hands of Charlie, who was now semi-retired but still living on the ranch and doted on the Quinn children like they were his own grandchildren. It was their first real time alone since Jacob had been born, and they relished every moment. "You ever regret it?" Tobias asked one evening as they walked through the city streets. Giving up teaching, settling for life on a ranch instead of in a city. Tessa stopped walking and turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "Tobias Quinn, you listen to me. I have never, not for one single second, regretted my life with you. That night in the rain, I thought I had lost everything. But really, I was just being led to exactly where I was supposed to be. You did not just offer me your coat that night. You offered me your life, your home, your heart. And I would choose you 1,000 times over in any circumstance, in any life." He kissed her then, right there on the street, not caring who might see. "I love you, Tessa Quinn. I loved you in the rain, I loved you at the altar. I love you more with every day that passes. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," she replied, "even when you burned the coffee." He laughed at that, the sound rich and warm, and pulled her close. "I still burn the coffee occasionally, just so you will come rescue it." "I know," she said, smiling against his chest. "I have always known." Years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. They weathered droughts and hard winters, celebrated births and mourned deaths, watched their children grow and their grandchildren arrive. Through it all, the love that had begun on a rainy evening in Monticello remained the foundation of their lives. Thomas married a schoolteacher from town, a smart young woman who reminded Tessa of herself at that age, and they settled on a piece of land that Tobias deeded to them, building their own ranch adjacent to the main property. Mary surprised everyone by becoming a horse trainer, developing a reputation throughout the territory for her skill with difficult animals. Jacob went to college in Salt Lake City, the first Quinn to pursue higher education, and came back with a law degree and plans to serve the community. On the evening of their 25th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch house for a celebration. The house rang with laughter and music, and the sounds of children playing, and Tessa stood in the kitchen, watching through the doorway at the life she and Tobias had created together. Tobias came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "About how far we have come," she said softly. "About that night in the rain and the scared young woman I was, and the incredible man who stopped to help her. "I was not incredible," Tobias protested. "I was just doing what anyone should have done." "But most people would not have done it," Tessa pointed out. "Most people walked right past me that day. But you stopped and you saw me, really saw me, and you offered me not just shelter from the storm but a place to belong." "I offered you a job," he corrected gently. "You offered me your life," Tessa said, turning in his arms to face him. "From that very first moment you were offering me everything you had. Your coat, your home, your protection, your respect, and eventually your heart. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." "Then we saved each other," Tobias said, touching her face with infinite tenderness. "Because I was drowning in loneliness before you came along. This house was just a building, the ranch was just work. You made it all mean something. You gave me a reason to come home at the end of the day, a reason to build something lasting. You gave me everything." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other while the party continued around them. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from that chance encounter. "Dance with me," Tobias said suddenly, "like we did at our wedding." "There is no music," Tessa pointed out, but she was already moving with him, swaying gently in the kitchen where they had shared so many meals and conversations and quiet moments together. "There is always music when I am with you," Tobias said, and began to hum the tune they had danced to on their wedding night, all those years ago. Tessa closed her eyes and let herself be swept away by the memory and the moment, by the feeling of her husband's arms around her, and the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Through the doorway, she could see Thomas dancing with his wife, Mary laughing at something Jacob said, grandchildren running around like wild things. This was her legacy, built on love and faith and the simple act of two people being kind to each other when kindness was needed most. The years continued their steady march forward. Tobias's hair turned gray, and Tessa found silver threads in her dark braid. Their hands became weathered and marked by time and work, but they still fit perfectly together, fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. They slowed down a bit, handing more of the ranch work over to Thomas and his growing family, but they never stopped being active participants in the life they had built. On Tessa's 50th birthday, surrounded by children and grandchildren, she made a short speech that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "When I was 23 years old, I sat in the rain in Monticello, Utah Territory, with nowhere to go and no one to care whether I lived or died. I thought my life was over. I thought I had come to the end of my story. But that night, a cowboy stopped in the storm and offered me his coat. And in offering me that coat, he offered me his life, his home, and eventually his heart. Everything good in my life, every joy I have experienced, every blessing I have received can be traced back to that moment of kindness. Tobias Quinn, you are my hero, my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life. Thank you for stopping in the rain. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. Thank you for giving me a reason to hope again." Tobias stood and crossed to her, taking her hands just as he had done so many times over the years. "And thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy who needed you more than he knew. Thank you for making my house a home, my life an adventure, and my heart complete. I would go through that storm 1,000 times if it meant finding you at the end of it." They kissed, and their family cheered, and Tessa thought that if her story had ended that night in the rain, she would have missed out on the most beautiful chapters of her life. As they moved into their 60s, Tobias and Tessa truly stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, though they still lived in the house that had sheltered them for so many years. They spent their days in gentle pursuits, tending a garden, reading together on the porch, playing with grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But mostly, they spent their time simply being together, cherishing every moment they had. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Tessa asked a question that had been on her mind. "Do you believe in fate, Tobias? You think we were always meant to find each other?" He considered for a moment, rocking slowly in his chair. "I do not know about fate," he said finally, "but I believe in choices. You chose to keep going even when things were dark. I chose to stop and help someone in need. We both chose to take a chance on each other, to build something together instead of going through life alone. Maybe that is better than fate. Maybe choosing each other every day through everything means more than being destined for each other." "I like that," Tessa said softly. "We chose each other. And I would choose you again," Tobias said, reaching over to take her hand. "Every single time, in every possible world, I would choose you." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands as the sun disappeared below the horizon and the first stars began to appear. Inside the house, they could hear Mary helping prepare dinner, and the sound of children's laughter drifted from the yard. Everything was exactly as it should be. As Utah finally achieved statehood in 1896, the Quinns celebrated along with everyone else, marveling at how much had changed since that rainy night in 1883 when their story began. Monticello had grown from a rough frontier town into a proper community with schools and churches and businesses. The ranch had prospered beyond their wildest dreams. Their children had grown into fine adults who were building their own legacies. But through all the changes, one thing remained constant: the love between Tobias and Tessa Quinn. It had started with an act of kindness on a stormy evening, and it had grown into something that sustained not just them, but everyone they touched. Their story became part of the local legend, told and retold as an example of how compassion and courage could change lives. When Tobias turned 70, he gathered his family around him and made a speech of his own. "I want you all to know that the secret to a good life is very simple. Find someone worth loving and then love them with everything you have. Work hard, be kind, and never walk past someone who needs help. That night I found your mother, grandmother, great-grandmother in the rain. I almost kept walking. I was tired. It was storming. I had my own problems. But something made me stop, and that choice changed everything. Never underestimate the power of small acts of kindness. They can literally change the world." The children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren listened respectfully, but it was Tessa whose eyes filled with tears. After all these years, after everything they had been through together, he could still surprise her with the depth of his love and the beauty of his heart. That night, lying in bed in the darkness, Tessa whispered, "I love you, Tobias Quinn. I have loved you since the moment you wrapped your coat around my shoulders, and I will love you until my last breath." "And beyond," Tobias replied, pulling her close. "We will love each other beyond the last breath and into whatever comes after. Nothing as strong as what we have can ever truly end." They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had done thousands of times before, two people who had beaten the odds and built a life worth living. More years passed peacefully. They watched Thomas become a grandfather himself, Mary's horses win prizes across the state, Jacob become a respected judge. They held new great-great-grandchildren and marveled at the expanding web of family that had grown from that chance encounter so many years ago. On a spring morning when Tessa was 73 and Tobias was 78, they took a walk together out to the rise where he had proposed all those decades ago. The walk took longer than it once had, and they had to stop and rest several times, but eventually they made it to the top and stood looking out over the valley. "You remember the first time we came up here?" Tobias asked. "Of course," Tessa replied. You asked me to marry you, and I thought my heart would burst from happiness. I was so nervous," he admitted. "I had rehearsed that speech for days, and then I got up here and forgot every word." "You said exactly what you needed to say," Tessa assured him. "You spoke from your heart, and that was perfect." They stood in silence for a while, each lost in memories of their life together. Then Tobias said, "I want you to know that if I could go back and live my life again, I would not change a single thing. Every moment, good and bad, led me to you and kept me with you. That is worth everything. Even the burnt coffee," Tessa teased gently. "Even the burnt coffee," he confirmed with a laugh. "Though I still maintain that sometimes I burn it on purpose just to make you smile." They made their way slowly back to the house, where Mary had prepared lunch and several grandchildren were waiting to visit. The house was full of noise and life, and Tessa moved through it all with quiet contentment, grateful for every moment. As evening fell and the family departed, Tobias and Tessa found themselves alone again on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one. "Do you remember what you said to me on our 10th anniversary?" Tessa asked. "Probably something romantic and slightly foolish," Tobias replied. "I was always saying romantic and slightly foolish things to you. You said that I was the best thing that ever happened to you, and I said the same thing back. But Tobias, I need you to understand something. You were not just the best thing that happened to me, you were everything. You gave me life when I had nothing to live for. You gave me hope when I was drowning in despair. You gave me love when I thought I would be alone forever. You gave me this family, this home, this beautiful life. You gave me everything." Tobias reached for her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "Then we gave each other everything, because I was half alive before you came along, just going through the motions. You made me whole, Tessa. You gave my life meaning and purpose. You made me want to be a better man, and then you loved me even when I fell short. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." They sat together as the night deepened, occasionally speaking but mostly just being present with each other. Two souls so completely intertwined that they functioned as one. They had been together for so long that they could often communicate without words, a glance or a touch conveying volumes. The years moved on gently. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with a huge party that brought family from across the state. There were photographs taken, multiple generations standing together, all of them owing their existence to a cowboy who had stopped in the rain, and a young woman who had been brave enough to accept his help. Tobias's health began to decline slowly when he reached his early 80s. Nothing dramatic, just the gradual wearing down that comes with a long life fully lived. But he remained sharp mentally and continued to take daily walks with Tessa, shorter now but still cherished. They would walk hand in hand through the property, remembering all the years they had spent building their life together. On a summer evening when Tobias was 83 and Tessa was 78, they sat on their beloved porch, and Tobias turned to her with an expression she knew well, the look that meant he was about to say something important. "I have been thinking," he began, and she smiled because that was how he always started his important conversations. "What have you been thinking about?" she prompted gently. "About that night in the rain, about how I almost walked past you. I was tired, it was late, I had a long ride home ahead of me. Part of me wanted to just keep going. But something made me stop and look at you, really look at you, and I saw someone who needed help. I am so grateful I stopped, Tessa. That choice gave me everything." "I am grateful you stopped too," she said softly. "I was at the end of my rope that night. I had decided that if things did not improve by morning, I would just start walking and see what happened. I might have died out there in the desert or worse. But you stopped, and you saved me, and you gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams." "We saved each other," Tobias said, as he had said so many times over the years. "That is what love does. It saves us from our own loneliness and fear. It gives us a reason to keep going when things get hard. And Tessa, loving you has been the greatest honor of my life." She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had been her anchor for more than 50 years. "Loving you has been my greatest honor, too. Every day with you has been a gift." They watched the sunset together, the sky turning those brilliant shades of red and gold that they had witnessed thousands of times from this very spot. The land around them was peaceful and prosperous, filled with the echoes of all the life they had lived and the family they had created. As the stars began to emerge, Tobias said quietly, "I am not afraid of what comes next, you know. Whether that is tomorrow or 10 years from now, I am not afraid, because I have lived a full life, a good life, loved and been loved in return. Not everyone can say that." "No," Tessa agreed. "Not everyone can say that. We have been very blessed. The only thing that worries me," he continued, "is leaving you alone. The thought of you sitting by yourself on this porch without me to hold your hand, that breaks my heart." Tessa lifted her head to look at him, her eyes fierce despite the tears gathering in them. "Now you listen to me, Tobias Quinn. We do not know who will go first or when, but whenever that time comes, the one left behind will carry on because that is what we do. We are strong because we have loved each other so well, and we will never truly be alone because we will carry each other in our hearts until we meet again. Do you understand?" "I understand," he said, touching her face with tenderness. "But I still hope I never have to live a day without you." "Then let us not waste time worrying about it," she said practically. "Let us just enjoy the days we have, however many that may be." They continued like that, taking each day as it came, finding joy in simple moments and in each other's company. Tobias's decline was gentle but steady, and eventually he needed a cane for his walks, then 2 canes, and finally found himself mostly confined to a chair on the porch. But even then, he remained engaged with life, with Tessa always at his side. On a crisp autumn morning when the cottonwoods along the creek had turned golden, just as they had been on the day Thomas was born all those years ago, Tobias woke feeling peaceful and clear-headed. He knew somehow that this was his last day, could feel it in his bones, and he was not afraid. Tessa brought him breakfast on the porch, where he insisted on sitting despite the cool air. She had wrapped him in blankets, fussing over him as she had done for more than 50 years, and he caught her hand and held it tight. "Stay with me," he said simply. "Always," she replied, settling into the chair beside him. "I will always be with you." They sat together in the morning sunlight, holding hands and watching the world wake up around them. The ranch was quiet, most of the family living elsewhere now, though they visited often. It was just the two of them, as it had been in the beginning, 2 people who had found each other against all odds. "Tell me again," Tobias said softly. "About that night in the rain." Tessa smiled, understanding. She had told this story hundreds of times to children and grandchildren, but it never got old. "I was sitting on the steps of the general store," she began. "I was soaking wet and freezing cold, and I had nowhere to go. I was at the absolute lowest point of my life, certain that things could not possibly get any worse. And then I heard footsteps, and I looked up, and there you were. This tall cowboy with a kind face, looking at me with such concern. And you asked if I was all right, and I wanted to laugh because I was so far from all right. But then you did something that changed everything. You took off your coat and wrapped it around my shoulders, and you offered me work and dignity and hope. You gave me your coat, Tobias, but really you gave me your life, and I have been grateful for that every single day since." "Best decision I ever made," Tobias murmured, his eyes drifting closed. "Stopping in that rain. Best decision of my life." "Mine too," Tessa whispered, holding his hand tighter. "Saying yes to you, to this life, to everything. Best decision I ever made." They sat in peaceful silence, the morning sun warming them both. Tobias's breathing became slower, deeper, more peaceful. Tessa knew what was happening, and her heart broke even as she understood that this was simply the natural end of a life well lived. "I love you," she said softly. "I have loved you from the first moment, and I will love you forever." "Forever," Tobias echoed, his voice barely audible. "My Tessa. My love. My everything." His hand squeezed hers one last time, gentle and loving, and then relaxed. His breathing stopped, and he was gone, slipping away as peacefully as a sigh, leaving behind a legacy of love and kindness that would echo through generations. Tessa sat with him for a long time, holding his hand and crying quiet tears, not of regret but of gratitude for every moment they had shared. When she finally felt ready, she kissed his forehead and whispered, "Thank you for stopping in the rain, my love. Thank you for everything." The family gathered for the funeral, coming from all across Utah and beyond. They laid Tobias to rest on the rise where he had proposed to Tessa all those years ago, with a view of the ranch and the valley he had loved so well. The headstone was simple but elegant, reading, "Tobias Quinn, beloved husband, father, grandfather." He stopped in the rain. Tessa visited the grave every day, sitting on a bench that Thomas had installed, talking to Tobias about the family and the ranch and how much she missed him. But she also continued to live, finding strength in her children and grandchildren, in the life she and Tobias had built together. She lived for 5 more years, active and engaged until the very end, telling stories of her cowboy who had stopped in the rain and given her everything. She passed peacefully in her sleep on a spring morning, and her family knew that she had finally gone to join the man she had loved for more than 50 years. They buried her beside Tobias on the rise, and her headstone read, "Tessa Quinn, beloved wife, mother, grandmother." She sat in the rain. But their story did not end with their deaths. It lived on in the dozens of descendants who owed their existence to a single act of kindness on a stormy evening. It lived on in the stories told around dinner tables and campfires, stories of true love and second chances. It lived on in the ranch itself, still prospering under the stewardship of their children and grandchildren, a testament to what could be built when 2 people chose to face life together. Years later, one of their great-great-grandchildren, a young woman facing her own crisis, would find herself at a crossroads. She would remember the story of Tessa sitting in the rain and Tobias stopping to help, and she would find the courage to accept help when it was offered, to take a chance on kindness, to believe in the possibility of new beginnings. Because that was the true legacy of Tobias and Tessa Quinn. Not just the family they created or the ranch they built, but the example they set of what love could be when it was based on compassion, respect, and the willingness to see another person's need and respond to it with an open heart. The coat that Tobias had given Tessa that rainy night was preserved by the family, passed down through generations as a tangible reminder of where it all began. It hung in the ranch house, carefully maintained, along with a plaque that told the story of the cowboy and the woman in the rain. Visitors to the ranch, which eventually became a historical site celebrating the pioneering spirit of early Utah, would see the coat and read the story and go away touched by the simple beauty of it. In a world that could be hard and cruel, here was proof that kindness mattered, that love could triumph, that one person stopping to help another could change the course of countless lives. The ranch itself continued to thrive for generations, adapting to changing times but never losing sight of the values that Tobias and Tessa had instilled. Hard work, integrity, compassion for those in need. These principles guided each successive generation of Quinns as they navigated the challenges of their own eras. The porch where Tobias and Tessa had spent so many evenings together became sacred ground for the family, a place where important decisions were made and difficult conversations were had. Countless proposals happened on that porch, countless reconciliations, countless quiet moments of reflection. It was as if the love that had been nurtured there had seeped into the very wood, blessing all who sat there. The bench on the rise beside their graves became another gathering place, a spot where family members would go to think, to pray, to seek guidance from the ancestors who had started it all. On anniversaries and birthdays, on holidays and ordinary Tuesdays, someone would climb the rise and sit on the bench and tell Tobias and Tessa about their life, their struggles, their joys. And somehow, sitting there in the wind and the sunshine, with the view of the valley spread out below, they always seemed to find the answers they were seeking. Whether that was the spirits of Tobias and Tessa offering guidance from beyond, or simply the peace that came from connecting with family history, no one could say. But it worked, and that was what mattered. The story of the coat and the rain became part of local folklore, told and retold with minor variations, but always maintaining the essential truth: that a cowboy had stopped to help a woman in need, and that simple act of kindness had blossomed into one of the greatest love stories the region had ever known. School children in Monticello learned about the Quinns in their local history classes, and many of them visited the ranch to see where it all happened. They would stand on the steps of what had been the general store, now a museum, and try to imagine what it must have been like to sit there in the rain, desperate and alone. Then they would see pictures of the happy family that had resulted, and they would understand in a visceral way the power of compassion. Young couples on the verge of marriage would visit the graves on the rise, asking for blessings from Tobias and Tessa for their own unions. It became tradition for Quinn family members to spend a night on the ranch before their weddings, sleeping in the house where it all began, hoping to absorb some of the love and commitment that had sustained their ancestors through more than 50 years of marriage. The story was written up in history books and newspapers, featured in documentaries about the settling of Utah, and became the subject of at least one novel and a made-for-television movie. But for the Quinn family, it was not history or entertainment. It was the foundation of who they were, the bedrock upon which everything else was built. Every Quinn child, as they came of age, was told the full story of Tessa and Tobias, not the sanitized version but the real story with all its fear and uncertainty and triumph. They learned about Tessa's desperation that rainy evening, about Tobias's decision to stop when he could have kept walking, about the leap of faith they both took in trusting each other. And most importantly, they learned the lesson that Tobias had shared at his 70th birthday. Never walk past someone who needs help. That principle guided the family in countless ways, large and small. Quinn descendants became known for their generosity, their willingness to lend a hand, their inability to see suffering without trying to alleviate it. Some became doctors, some social workers, some teachers, all of them motivated by the same impulse that had driven Tobias to stop in the rain all those years ago. The belief that we are all responsible for each other, that kindness matters, that love can grow from the smallest seed if it is nurtured with care. The ranch remained in the family for more than a century after Tessa's death, a living testament to what she and Tobias had built. Oh, it changed with the times, incorporating new technologies and adapting to new economic realities. but at its heart, it remained the same. A place of love and hard work and family, a place where people belonged. Eventually, the state of Utah designated the ranch as a historical landmark, recognizing its importance not just to local history, but to the broader story of the American West. A small museum was built near the main house, filled with artifacts from Tobias and Tessa's life and the lives of their descendants. The coat held pride of place, displayed in a temperature-controlled case with lights that brought out the rich brown of the leather. Visitors from around the world came to see it and to hear the story. They would read the plaques and look at the photographs and artifacts, and many of them would leave with tears in their eyes, touched by the simple beauty of a love story that had begun with an act of compassion on a stormy evening. The Quinn family remained involved in the ranch and the museum, with various descendants serving as docents and caretakers, ensuring that the story was told accurately and with the respect it deserved. They hosted an annual gathering on the anniversary of Tobias and Tessa's wedding, with family coming from all over the country to reconnect and celebrate their shared heritage. These gatherings were joyous occasions, full of laughter and music and storytelling. The oldest members of the family would share their memories of Tessa, who some of them had actually known, and her memories of Tobias. The youngest children would run around the property where their ancestors had lived and loved, creating new memories that would someday become part of the family lore. And always, at some point during the gathering, someone would stand and propose a toast. To Tessa and Tobias Quinn, who taught us that love begins with kindness, that family is everything, and that we are never so lost that we cannot be found. May we honor their memory by living with the same compassion and courage they showed us. Glasses would raise, voices would echo the sentiment, and for a moment, the veil between past and present would seem paper-thin. The family would feel the presence of those who had come before, Tobias and Tessa first among them, surrounding them with love and pride and hope for the future. As the years became decades, and the decades stretched toward a century since Tessa's death, the story remained as powerful as ever. New generations discovered it and were moved by it, finding in it lessons that remained relevant no matter how much the world changed around them. The fundamental truth at the heart of it, that one person's kindness can change another person's life, that love can grow in the most unlikely circumstances, that we are all connected to each other in ways we cannot always see. This truth resonated across time and space, touching hearts and changing minds and inspiring countless acts of compassion. And so the story of the cowboy who offered his coat and his life, and the woman who sat in the rain and found love, lived on. It lived in the ranch that still stood strong, in the descendants who carried their blood and their values, in the countless people who heard the tale and were moved to be a little kinder, a little braver, a little more willing to stop when they saw someone in need. Tobias and Tessa Quinn had built something that transcended their individual lives, something that would endure as long as there were people who believed in the power of love and kindness. They had started with nothing but hope and compassion, and they had created a legacy that would never die. Their love story, which began on a rainy evening in Monticello, Utah Territory in 1883, became eternal, a beacon of light showing that even in our darkest moments, salvation might be just around the corner in the form of another human being willing to stop, to see us, to offer help without expecting anything in return. And that was perhaps the greatest gift they gave to the world, not just their own love story, but the inspiration for countless others to create their own tales of compassion and connection. Every person who heard their story, and then chose to help someone in need became part of it, extending the reach of that original act of kindness forward through time in ever-widening circles. The rain that had brought them together became a symbol in family lore, representing the storms we all face in life and the help we sometimes need to weather them. "Remember the rain," Quinn family members would tell each other in times of trouble. "Remember that Tessa sat in the rain and Tobias stopped. Remember that from the darkest moments can come the greatest blessings." And they did remember. They remembered, and they lived accordingly, spreading kindness and love wherever they went, creating their own stories of connection and compassion, ensuring that the legacy of Tobias and Tessa Quinn would never fade. The coat, the graves, the ranch, the stories, all of it stood as testament to a simple truth: that love offered freely without expectation or demand can change everything. That was what Tobias offered Tessa that rainy night when he gave her his coat and, eventually, his life. And that was what they both offered to all who came after them. An example of what was possible when two people chose love over fear, connection over isolation, hope over despair. As the sun set over the ranch on another day, another year, another generation, the story remained. It remained in the land itself, in the house where they had lived, in the rise where they were buried. It remained in the hearts of their descendants and in the minds of all who heard their tale. It remained as proof that love endures, that kindness matters, and that sometimes the simple act of stopping in the rain can change not just two lives but countless lives stretching forward through time. Tobias and Tessa Quinn had found each other in a storm, and they had created a love that would shine like a lighthouse for generations, guiding others toward hope and happiness and the possibility of new beginnings. Their story had no ending, only continuation, as each new day brought fresh opportunities for their descendants and all who knew their tale to honor their legacy by choosing kindness, by offering help, by believing in the transformative power of love. The woman had sat in the rain. The cowboy had offered his coat and his life. And from that simple beginning had grown something beautiful and eternal, a love story for the ages, a beacon of hope, a reminder that we are never alone as long as we are willing to help each other. That was the true happily ever after, not an ending but a continuation. Love rippling outward through time and space, touching hearts and changing lives, forever and always.